Now that we know some of the 6 main causes of pollution in North Carolina, we're going to look at some protective things that we have done in order to remove some of that pollution. So here's a picture. It's a before and after picture of the same area where you have obviously a lot of pollution in the top picture, and then it's been cleaned up in the bottom one. This is a picture of the beaches. This is actually before the 70s. There was a lot of pollution. The thinking was still the solution to pollution is dilution. And people would just dump pollution wherever they wanted. And they didn't think much of it because it was kind of the whole out of sight, out of mind philosophy. And so, but eventually, things like that, they always catch up to you. Just because the problem is out of mind and doesn't mean that it's not there. It will catch up eventually. And that's what people started noticing. So at one point, a lot of your beaches you couldn't go to because they were so covered in trash, or so much sewage had affected the water you couldn't swim in it because it was so polluted. Then the government started in the 70s. They created what we call the Clean Water Act. This is a very important law that we always want to stay into place. This regulated the amount of pollution that people were dumping into rivers and streams. Basically, it stopped point source pollution. They were telling companies, if you have waste or sewage, you can't just dump that directly into a body of water. You have to clean it first before you return the water. And so this is what really led to a huge increase in sewage treatment centers. Because again, a lot of industries were thinking, if we just dump raw sewage in this in this lake, well, the lake's big enough, it's not going to have an impact. Well, over time, the more sewage that got dumped there, the bigger impact it had. And so that's why we started treating our water more and more. So after this law was passed and people were forced to stop doing point source pollution, the areas that were safe to swim in went from 36 bodies of water to 62% became safe. And that was over the course of 20 years. And that was not treating the lakes or anything. It was just stopping polluting them so that nature could kind of start to heal itself. And again, this was all in America. There's still a lot of point source pollution issues in other countries, but they're starting to get better and better over time. Especially your industrialized countries, they have a lot of these treatment centers set up. And that is making our water so much safer to be around, which is why we don't think anything of it. The other law that was passed, and this was in the 70s, was the Safe Drinking Water Act. This law told companies that were treating the water in order to go into our homes or into water bottles, it said that this water has to be at least this clean before you can start giving it to people to drink. This is all a law that we are very thankful for. This is why you don't have to think about it when you go to any faucet anywhere in this country. You can drink from that water and you're perfectly fine. This law set a max amount of contaminant levels for the water. And so this was holding your treatment plants accountable and saying, if this water has this many toxic metals in it, you can't give it to people. If it has this in it, you can't give it to people. You have to have it at least at this level before it's safe for other people to consume. So this was a law that helped protect us against things such as your heavy metals. In Michigan, when there was that lead contamination and all those people were getting sick, they were breaking this law. That would have been a more widespread thing that people weren't aware of until this law came into effect, making sure that it was illegal for any treatment center to give out water that was of bad quality to people. Potable water, this is just a definition. If water is potable, it means that it's clean enough to drink. So if you go to a lake, although the lake may be pretty clean, it's not what we would consider drinkable water. We still want our water to be treated before we drink it. So water that's in a lake, that may be clean water, but potable water means it's clean enough to actually drink and consume. So that's just a vocab word for you to know. So something for you to think about. How is it that we could test our water quality without using any chemicals or tools? Well, one thing that we can use is actually living organisms to see how clean our water is. These living organisms is what we call macroinvertebrates. Macro means big. It means big enough to see with your naked eye. Micro means it's too small to see with the naked eye. So if you are looking through a microscope at bacteria, You can't see bacteria just from looking at it. You have to use the microscope in order to zoom in and make those the bacterium larger in order for your eyes to be able to see it. If something is macro, it means it's just like an ant or a beetle. It's something that's large enough you can see it with no help. Invertebrate means it's something that doesn't have a backbone. So we can look at these macroinvertebrates. They're specific bugs that have no spine, and they're large enough for us to just see. And they can be an indicator of water quality. And the reason they're such a good indicator of water quality is because they are sensitive to changes in water. There's 3 different types of macroinvertebrates. Some of them can only live in really clean water, and others of them live in only dirty water. And so depending on what kind is which and where we see them, that gives us a heads up of what that water quality is like. So let's take a look. Certain macroinvertebrates, and this picture is showing you some of them, they're very tolerant, meaning they like to live in very polluted water. Others can only survive in very clean water. So if you find macroinvertebrates that only live in clean water and you see them in a lake, that tells you, well, that lake must be pretty clean. Versus if you find macroinvertebrates that only live in dirty water, that tells you, well, that water must be pretty dirty. So we put these macroinvertebrates into 3 groups, group 1, 2, and 3. If the macroinvertebrates in group 1 are the bugs that can only live in the cleanest of water. And so we call them group 1 macroinvertebrates. So again, if you are looking at a water and you find a bunch of these macroinvertebrates, you know that body of water is very clean. Now, it isn't necessarily clean enough for you to drink, but it's clean enough for you to swim in. And these are a couple pictures of those macroinvertebrates. Group 2 macroinvertebrates, they live in water that is not super clean, but it's a little polluted. So this is your middle group. And here is some pictures of those macroinvertebrates that you could find. And then group 3 are your invertebrates that live in the dirtiest of all water. Now, this is one type of snail that you can find. There are snails that are in the group 1 that live in very clean water. So just because you find a snail doesn't mean water is polluted. But if you find a leech living in a body of water, that leech is going to be a big heads up that that water is very dirty and I would not swim in it. 1, don't swim in it because the water is polluted. But 2, leeches are really creepy. So I wouldn't want to be around a leech anyway. They also have a lot of other types of worms and whatnot. Like parasitic type animals that live in these polluted, dirty waters. So if you find a leech and you're swimming, get out, don't get back in that water. It's polluted and it has leeches and probably other parasites that are very disgusting. Now, how do you know which invertebrates are in group 1, group 2, or group 3? Well, scientists have what we call a biotic index. The biotic index is simply something that has a bunch of pictures and names of the different animals. Just like if you were using the index of a book, you're using that to look something up. The biotic index is what the scientists use to look up to see where these different bugs live. So they would look at, say you go to a body of water and you dig up some different bugs, then you take them back to the lab and you pull out your biotic index and it would show you, well, if it's any of these organisms that you found, that means they're in group 1, so the water's clean. Say you find a couple of these bugs but a bunch of these other ones, then that's showing you that your water's pretty dirty. Now, if you found a couple of group 1s and a bunch of group 2s, that means the water may be kind of clean, but it's starting to get more and more polluted. But scientists do not memorize where all these different, or what group these different insects are in. They use their biotic index to look it up. And this is a very simplified version that you're looking at. They have a more detailed one that people actually use, but I just wanted to give you an example. And this is just a big summary of everything we just told you. So the quality of water can be determined by the different macroinvertebrates that are found in a sample. The more sensitive groups, the higher the quality of water, meaning the cleaner it is. The more bugs that you find from a tolerant group, such as group 3, the lower quality of the water, aka the dirtier. You can identify what group macrovertebrates are in by comparing them to what we call the biotic index. And that is all for the pollution. This is a cool link if you want to watch it. It's Brain Games. This is actually a show that's or was on Netflix. I don't know if it is anymore. But it's cool. It's mind games that you can play. So if you want to look at that link and watch that, that would be good. But that is it for this PowerPoint and our pollution. So I'll go ahead and end this video, and hopefully you'll look at the brain games and give your brain some exercise.